LSAC has confirmed they're removing the logic game section for everybody next year. Hey, what's up everybody? Steve Schwartz here from LSAT Unplugged, joining you today with a major news update about LSAC removing the logic game section. Before I get into it, a little bit about LSAT Unplugged. We offer live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. Check out the links below this video to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd love to help you out. So yesterday, LSAC made a major announcement that they're removing the logic game section for all test takers after the June 2024 LSAT. Now, for those of you who've been following me for a while, who've been in the LSAT prep world for a while, you may have heard about the lawsuit between a blind test taker named Angelo Bino and LSAC a couple of years back. In 2019, LSAC settled the lawsuit and agreed to develop a new version of the test without the current game section within the next 4 years. This was back in the fall of 2019. It got a lot of press at the time. There were articles in CNN and Reuters, plenty of major news outlets. A lot of folks couldn't possibly believe, however, that LSAC would actually change the LSAT for everyone just because some sight-impaired test takers were affected. But in fact, it has turned out that LSAC is removing the current game section for all test takers. Now, they did experiment with replacing the current game section with some new types of logic games, but ultimately it did not work out. I'm going to read now from this Reuters article talking about the news, where they share some quotes from LSAC saying that, quote, "The revised analytical reasoning, aka logic games questions the council tested still presented challenges for sight-impaired test takers. And because the analytical and logical reasoning sections test the same skills, it made sense to drop analytical reasoning altogether," testee said. So in other words, what LSAC is saying here is that when they tested out potential replacements for the game section in June 2022 and November 2022, and then the field study in December 2022, where they were playing with different potential replacements for games, ultimately, those did not serve the purpose of putting sight-impaired test takers and other test takers on an equal playing field. And so LSAC has decided to instead simply remove logic games altogether and replace them with a second scored logical reasoning section. So for those of you taking the LSAT after June 2024, the big takeaway for you is that you will not be experiencing logic games at all, and you will also not need to deal with some new bizarre type of logic games replacement. Instead, you will simply be dealing with a second scored logical reasoning section. So for anyone taking the LSAT in November or January, February, April, or June of 2024, you're taking the current LSAT with one scored logic games, one scored logical reasoning, and one scored reading comp, along with, of course, an unscored experimental section. However, if you're taking the LSAT in August 2024 or beyond, you will be taking the LSAT with two scored logical reasoning sections, one scored reading comprehension section, and then one unscored experimental section of either logical reasoning or reading comprehension. Now, you may be wondering, will law schools look at test takers differently if they took the LSAT with logic games or without logic games? The good news is that it does not matter which format you take. Law schools really do not care. They just want the score. Now, obviously, of course, logic games and logical reasoning are not equivalent. They are different in nature, and some test takers will do better on logic games, and some test takers will do better on logical reasoning. So you personally have a decision to make. Do you want to take the LSAT with logic games or without logic games? Now, I know that logic games may seem intimidating at first. In fact, that very same Reuters article mentions, quote, "Logic games are viewed by many as the most difficult section of the LSAT to master." A 2016 article in The Atlantic concluded that logic games in particular fuel the LSAT test prep industry because most aspiring lawyers are unfamiliar with them. I agree, of course, that logic games can cause some anxiety, and they are viewed by many as the most difficult section at first. But the truth is, and others in the LSAT prep world will tell you the same, logic games are the most learnable and, in fact, most perfectible section of the exam. And so I actually think it's bad news for test takers that LSAC is removing logic games, because logic games are so learnable and perfectible. They're more mathematical. They don't have the same perceived ambiguities of language that logical reasoning and reading comprehension do. The patterns are more apparent in games than they are in reasoning or reading comp. And so I do recommend that, if possible, you take the LSAT sooner rather than later and aim to be done with the LSAT before they remove the logic game section, because logical reasoning and reading comp are a bit tougher to improve upon than logic games is. Of course, you can master LR, you can master RC as well, and you should and you will. But if you're watching this now in October 2023, you have a unique opportunity to take advantage of this news and be done with the LSAT before they make the change, and then you will be at a relative advantage compared to those applying next cycle, assuming you are applying next cycle. Let's say we have a hypothetical test taker who's taking the LSAT in April 2024 versus a test taker taking the LSAT in August 2024. Hardly anybody taking the LSAT in April is applying in the current cycle because it's just so late. Instead, those folks taking it in April 2024 or June 2024 will be applying in the fall of 2024 to start law school in fall of 2025. They're in a great position because they got to take the LSAT with the current game section. In contrast, a test taker taking the LSAT in August 2024 or beyond doesn't get the benefit of taking the LSAT with games. They're taking 2 LRs and 1 RC, and as a result of that, they don't have that same perfectible game section that the other test takers who planned ahead did. So you, by watching this video and by planning ahead, living in 2023, watching this right now, you have the opportunity to take the LSAT in the next, 6 months or so, 7, 8 months or so, before the LSAT changes radically by removing games, and you can then be done with it, move on with life, because you planned ahead. So my recommendation going forward is take the LSAT with games if you can. Of course, if you hate games, if they're just a total disaster for you, if you're intimidated by them, I do get it, but you also have 6+ months to master them by doing any one of, or nearly all ideally, of the 400 or so released logic games in the actual published official LSAT prep tests. So anyway, folks, that's all for now. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to see it. I don't do any advertising for this channel. I rely only on word of mouth to help get the word out, and your sharing this video really does make a big difference. And maybe you know someone out there who's taking the LSAT in the near future or taking it in 2024 or beyond. Of course, it would do them a big favor as well to share a link to this video so they can be well informed about the upcoming changes and plan accordingly. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.